Greetings, traveler. I'm SnapJelly, and the swords in Skyrim, are they realistic? Well, there are a lot of swords to choose from, so I chose to put them in three categories: the good, the bad, and the what. You have arrived at the third video, the what category. Now, previously in episode 1, I talked about the swords that were still, not great, but usable in a real-life battle. And in the second video, I talked about swords that are still not horrible, but have one or two just tiny design flaws that would actually change the effectivity of the sword quite a lot. Now, in this video, however, I will talk about the swords that are just useless. Just in terms of design, either shape or whatever they have, you can't use them. There's no way. I am, however, glad to say that there are only 3 swords in this category. Yeah, and that's a lot better than I originally anticipated, so that's a good thing. To me it is, at least. So with that being said, and without further ado, join me in my quest. And I'll tell you why. What? First up is the Orc Sword. Now, right off the bat, you can see it's curved in a very odd way. This will make the blade just floppy and hard to maneuver. Also, you can see that the edge is not even. Not in the slightest. It's just odd. You see, performing a cut is not just applying the edge to your enemy. The thing that actually cuts your enemy is the little bit of pull or the little bit of push that you apply during the cut. And this is amplified by curvature of swords. Because if your sword is curved and you perform a draw cut, meaning that you pull as you cut your opponent, you have a lot more surface area, creating a deeper wound. But this chunky edge, it's gonna hit every single one of those edges and just stop itself. It's not gonna be an even cut, if it's gonna be a cut at all. It's just chunky, it won't work. Also, the sword has a very odd curve that really won't help it out either. Now this next part I found pretty hard to put into words, so I decided to show it to you using a little bit of iron wire right here. So let me just bend this into shape real quick. You see, the orcish sword is not curved, it is edged forward, kind of like this. Can you see that a little bit? Like that? This is a bit exaggerated, but still, it has this idea. Now, this poses a problem. I mean, there are swords in history that use this idea of a forwards angle like this, but when you have a sword like that, it needs to be proportioned precisely right. Or else, if you have a shape like this, once you cut somebody with it, the sword is going to want to do this. Right? It'll flip over and change. You need to get the proportions precisely right if you want to prevent the sword from flipping like that. You need to get it into a perfect circle shape or something, otherwise it's just going to do this. It's going to flop all over the place. So the orcish sword doesn't have these proportions quite right, and because of this, using the sword is going to be very clunky. It is going to just flop all over the place, and if you do get a good strike in, and it is only going to dig into your opponent just a tiny bit, then the sword is going to meet some resistance and it's going to want to bend. It's just going to flip itself out. And that will leave like a wide wound, like a really open, gruesome one, but just a very shallow one. And that doesn't really help you. I mean, it's just not going to kill anybody. Lastly, it looks like it has a very sharp point. But because of the shape, thrusting is going to be an awful lot harder. Now, this actually applies to all 3 of these swords, so I'm going to clarify that later. Second up is the ebony sword. Alright, so right off the bat, this handle is weird. Like, what is going on? Where are you supposed to put your hand? Just answer me that. Where are you supposed to put your hand? Like, all the way down here? Or, like, with 2 fingers up here and 2 down here? Like, do a little Spock thingy? Or are you supposed to put your index finger up there and the rest wherever? Like, where are you supposed to put your hand? Is this supposed to be a handle? There is no room for the hand. Once more, the overall shape of the sword, or its curvature, is a problem. Hey, here I am again. I'm gonna interrupt myself quite a lot in this video, so prepare for that. The ebony sword has kind of the same problem as the orcish sword had with its shape. You see, it is curved backwards and then forward again. Let me just get my iron wire in the right shape. Alright, there you go. It's once more, it's incredibly exaggerated, but you get the idea. You need to cut with this part, right? This is the sharp part. And you once more have the same problem. As you hit somebody with it, it is just gonna flip. It is gonna want to flip, and even if the curve is very light, like it is on the sword, it's just a slight curve, it's still there, and that will pose a problem. The sword is not gonna dig into your opponent. It's not gonna want to dig into your opponent. It is gonna want to twist itself over to the side and fly out. It doesn't work. This curvature is pointless and useless. It's terrible. And also, as I said, this sword once more has a bit of a curved tip, which I will clarify later. But another thing that would be a problem with thrusting if you use this sword is the fact that there's nothing to stop your hand from sliding up. That's a second usage of the guard, and even if you don't have a large guard, like a guard that's not meant for blocking, there needs to be something to prevent your hand from sliding up. All that this sword has are like these little bumps and ridges right here. That's not going to be enough. If you thrust with this sword, it's going to meet some resistance somewhere along the way, and your hand will slide up and you're going to cut your own hand with it. Yeah, that doesn't work. It does have a sword breaker though. Well, at least little cap here, like I assume that that's a sword breaker. Well, it could function as a sword breaker, I'm telling you that. It can trap swords, and then with a quick snap you can actually, you know, chip the edge of your opponent's sword. That's the idea of a sword breaker. It can function that way. That's a nice little aesthetic. It's not gonna save the design though. The design is still bad, but I just wanted to point it out. And lastly, obviously, the Daedric, this one, right? Now people wondered why I didn't put this sword into the bad category. Well, quite simply because it's not really a sword, to be honest. Out of all of the Skyrim swords, this one is the least sword-like. It doesn't do anything that a sword is supposed to do. Oh boy, where do I even start? Alright, so it has an incredibly thick spine, as you can see here. I don't know what that does. I guess it reinforces the blade, but you know, any decent sword wouldn't need that. It's not really necessary. And that is gonna be a problem, because it's incredibly thick. So there's no way you can ever cut somebody with this thing. At the most, you're gonna cut this deep, and then it's gonna hit the spine, and you won't cut any further. There's no way. You can't force this thick a thing to go through somebody's body. Not that you would actually get that far because of this huge serrated edge. Yes, the serrated edge. I wanted to talk about that a little bit, because people seem to believe that spikes pointing your enemy's way is a good thing, that spikes help you. Now, just answer this. Why don't any historical designs have spikes pointing your enemy's way? I mean, it's not like people didn't have the technology to make spikes on swords. They decided not to. And this is because spikes don't work as well as just an edge that's even. Just try this out. Just hang a t-shirt outside and try and cut it with a saw blade. It doesn't work. The shirt is gonna get stuck in between all the openings of different spikes like that, and you will just drag it in a little bit, but it's not actually gonna cut the shirt. It might leave a little hole, but that's it. And with the sword, it functions quite the same way. If you have a proper sword and a proper swordsman that swings the sword very well, then a cut with a sword it will split flesh, and it can cut through bone. But with spikes like this, it is going to meet an awful lot of resistance, so it will just be blunt impact force. If you would get a strike like that, then it will hit your body, it will get stuck on the bone, and you would have an awful lot of holes in you because of the spikes, which will be annoying, but not lethal. Whereas if you get an ordinary sword, a normal sword, and slice with that, it might as well go straight through, considering it's a good sword, and a good swing, of course. This sword, however, it doesn't. The spikes do not help you. If the edge was just an ordinary edge, it would have been 1,000 times better. Well, again, it's not really a serrated edge, it's just points, like spikes. Spikes pointing down. And if you consider what I just explained about pulling when you cut somebody, yeah, that is gonna meet a lot of resistance. It's not gonna help you. Also, it has a spike at the pommel here, so if you want to draw this sword and you misgrab, you'll once more stab yourself in the hand. Not very comfortable. These spikes are, well, they're not in the way, but, you know, they honestly they don't do shit, so. And it has a very odd and unnecessary curve. Once more with a tip that does not align with the rest of the blade. Last thing I wanted to clarify, the idea of curved swords, of stabbing with curved swords, is always something that rings some bells with people. Now, I'm here to tell you, yes, you can stab with curved swords, but it is harder. Well, to put it simply, if you have a curved sword and you want to stab with that, you have to stab at an angle. That's it, because of course you have to drive the point into your opponent. Now, if the point is upwards when you hold your sword out, then you have to stab at an angle. That is possible, you can do that, but it is an awful lot harder, and anybody who actually practices sword fighting will agree with me on this. To actually perform a thrust with a curved sword, to be accurate with it, it's an awful lot harder than it seems. It's very difficult to get right. It's also very difficult to time right, and once you do get it right and do, thrust thrust your opponent, then still it puts an awful lot of strain on your muscles, because it's just an odd movement to make, no matter what side you do it from. And history actually confirms this, looking at the swordsmen of the Middle East, which were recognized by the British to be some of the best swordsmen out there, but they didn't have much thrusting in their swordsmanship, because, well, they just had very curved swords, and it's hard to thrust with curved swords. So, just to put it simply, yes, you can thrust with curved swords, you can, but it makes it an incredible amount harder. There are various reasons why you would want a curved sword over a straight sword, but if you don't get any of the advantages of a curved sword, it is just pointless. There's no reason why these swords, because each and every one of these swords have this, their tip kind of goes like this, which makes thrusting more difficult for no reason. There's no reason for their tips to be curved that way, well, except for maybe they think it looks cool, but it doesn't do them any good. It doesn't help them at all. If the tips were straight, it would have been 1,000 times better, because then at least you could stab with the things. Well, stab more easily, that's what I should say. Yeah, so the curvature of the sword is useless. The overall shape doesn't really help you all that much. There's no reason why there is a curve in this sword. Likewise with the orc sword, if the handle was just more in line with the rest of the blade, it wouldn't be nearly as bad. Well, it also wouldn't be good, but it would not be useless, at least. And likewise, the ebony sword, this backwards curve makes no sense. There's no reason why it would be there. So what it comes down to is curves. Well, not really, because, well, if these swords were straight, then, well, they would still just be bad. But, the curves, the unnecessary curvature on these designs really, really killed them. So that was all of them. I hope you enjoyed. You can click the buttons in the screen right now to watch part 1 or part 2. And also you can follow me on social media, /SnapJelly Army. Links are in the description below. And thank you for joining my quest, and I hope you'll join me in the next one. Bye guys. Ba-bam.